This is More Than Money with Mapalo Makhu, brought to you by Sasfin Wealth.
Welcome to More Than Money. I'm Mapalo Makhu, a personal finance columnist, and I love having money conversations that change people's perspective about finances. Why am I doing this podcast, you might ask? To talk about money. Not the paper stuff. I mean the baggage, the feeling, the emotional, heart-wrenching stuff. We find this conversation so uncomfortable to have, which is why on this podcast, I have decided to have this very difficult conversations. We are going to have some difficult discussions because better money conversations lead to better money confidence, and healthy money dialogue leads to healthy money decisions. Today, I am joined by Erik Kruger. Erik is a keynote speaker, author, and high-performance coach. Erik, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's awesome to be with you. Thank you.
Awesome. So now, Erik, this podcast, we go deep into the conversation about money. But before we get to that, can you just give us a little bit of a background into your childhood?
I grew up in Springs. My dad was a pastor. My mom is a psychologist. And so growing up in Springs was interesting, small town experience, close-knit community. But it was awesome. I feel like, when you are part of a small community like that, it's easier to stand out. It's easier to achieve more and kind of be lifted to a higher level.
You mentioned that your dad was a pastor and your mom was a psychologist. Having grown up in that type of household, did your parents discuss money around the dinner table?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because my dad, like being a pastor, you don't grow up seeing a ton of ambition in your dad, right? Like because when you're a pastor, you have a certain trajectory in your career. He always went where he feel called. And so and obviously you don't make a lot of money as a pastor. But then my mom went from being a librarian to being a psychologist and then getting her PhD in psychology. And so all of a sudden she was making a lot more money. And I remember us going from sitting in Spur and being told, listen, you can only have one Coke to oh, okay, that second Coke is now okay, But I can't remember us ever having very serious conversations about money apart from my mom just always being very strict about budgeting and being very clear, this is, the Coke is the perfect example. One Coke per meal, not two Cokes per meal. This amount of savings before you can do X, Y, or Z, but not much discussed.
Yeah, and I think that's most households growing up. Looking at your mom, having started with very little and having worked her way up, what was that change for you? Was there some sort of a mental shift in realizing that, oh, actually, we are now in a financially better position?
Maybe subconsciously, there was a shift that started to happen where I could see that you could change your position in life.
Yes.
There's that quote from The Greatest Showman that says, man's position in life is only determined by the level of his imagination. And I think maybe to some degree, I started seeing that come to fruition and started seeing that, oh, okay, well, you can go from making X amount of money to X plus X and X plus Y. And, you could make a lot more money than you thought maybe was possible. So maybe subconsciously, I started seeing a bit of an entrepreneurial flair in my mom. And that maybe was part of the reason that also triggered me to be more entrepreneurial. But I can't say that, so apart from having more than one Coke, I can't say that there was a massive change in spending habits. My mom has always been frugal. She grew up frugal. I think that just continued even though she had a lot of money, which has been the complete opposite for me, is that I have a bit of a shopping addiction, I'd say. That when I land big deals, I like to splurge. So I don't know if in some way there's a bit of a rebellion from my childhood in how I'm spending today.
We'll definitely get to your own spending habits. You mentioned that your dad was a pastor and your mom started climbing up her career ladder. Did you see some differences in terms of their relationship? Were there any uncomfortable moments, if you can call them that, where perhaps someone felt like, you know what, you're making a bit more money now, or they really handled that well and it was never an issue?
I don't remember any conversations between them, at least that we were privy to, regarding that. I grew up in a very traditional Afrikaans household with very traditional values. And of course, the traditional thinking is that the man should be making most of the money taking care of the family. And really in my household, that was flipped on its head because my mom was making way more than my dad.
Yeah.
I observed that dynamic. I think for most part, they handled it well. I don't think that they got caught up in that trap of traditional thinking and thinking, oh, like, I'm so insufficient in my role as a man or provider for the family. It became quite natural that my dad stepped into the role of support. He would make food during the day because my mom was working really hard. She would start her first session at like 8 o'clock. She would finish at 9 o'clock most nights with her last patient. And when she was doing her PhD, she was doing 8 until like 6 with patients, and then she'd go and sit with her PhD for the rest of the night. So she had this incredible work ethic. And what it just meant is my dad slotted into the role of support. So he was taking us to all our different sports practices. He would make food during the day. He would make sure that we got to school when we were younger. So I'm not quite sure how that influenced me coming out of that structure or setup. It was obvious to me. Like I could see their roles have switched from what traditionally you would have expected in a household.
I mean, they made it work, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure.
What did you study in varsity?
When I was a matric, I remember thinking that I really want to be a doctor. When I applied for that, it turned out I was a bit late. So I thought, well, let me see if I can get into physio, because that seemed like a good alternative. But I was also too late for that. So I went and studied biokinetics actually for my very first year at Pretoria. Then the year after that, I reapplied and I got into physio. So I studied physiotherapy at Wits. And then I did a few other things. I did my postgraduate diploma in management through Wits Business School. And then I also did my master's degree in business and executive coaching through Wits Business School.
So that was going to be my question. How do you move from physio to becoming a high performance coach? What prompted you into this career?
It was quite serendipitous, to be honest. I've always known that I want to be of service to people, that I want to help in some capacity. And so physio was sort of the natural starting point in that regard. And as I got more and more into physio, I actually started realizing it wasn't quite the career path for me. There were things I didn't enjoy about it. And so while I was still working in the hospitals, I started looking at different side hustles. It's like, what can I do that's going to give me money that isn't related to physio? And at that time, I was very much into the digital world. So I was seeing everyone making money from online side hustles, whether it was like starting a directory site or selling a course online. And I thought, cool, I'm going to explore this. I'm going to try that. And I tried tons and tons of different ideas, trying to start an online business. None of it worked until around 2014, 2015, where I started a website called Better Man. And Better Man was just essentially me saying, I want to be a better man every single day, and I'm going to document and share my journey. So it wasn't actually going to be a business. But then all of a sudden, men just started flocking to it. I think the name was just so descriptive of what the product was that men just flocked to it. And very soon we had a community of about 18,000 men. We had a daily email that was going out to about 18,000 men as well. And so out of the blue, there was this big community, and this community was saying to me, listen, we want to meet each other in person. So I was like, cool, okay, I'll host events. So I started hosting events. And then the community said, well, do you do coaching? And I was like, well, I don't, but now I do. Like when you're an entrepreneur, you always just say yes and you figure it out. So I went and I read as many coaching books as I could. I was like, cool, I'm a coach, and then started coaching, and then realized, actually, I really enjoy this. So like being on stage again with the events, I was like, I really enjoy this. Sitting in session, helping people think through the challenges they're facing, I enjoyed that. And because everyone these days is a coach, I'm sure you've seen it, like you log onto Facebook and there's a new coach that's popped up somewhere. I decided to formalize what I'm doing a little bit more. And that's why I did my master's, to say, cool, there's a bit of a distinction between the guy who just said he's a coach yesterday and who I am today. And since then, I've just gone deeper and deeper into the world of business and working with corporates, and I've just really enjoyed it. You get to play at the highest levels. You get to really make an impact. I'm still doing what I set out to do, which is to impact people's lives. It's just different. Back then I would rehab your knee or your hip after surgery. And today I'm helping you to think about, how do you live into your potential? How do you create and be part of a team that's doing meaningful and impactful work?
Wow, that is brilliant. Now let's go back to realizing that, you know what, maybe physio is not what I want to entirely do with my life. And you started a side hustle. Do you remember the first time you actually made money out of your side hustle?
I almost want to say that Better Man was the first time I made money outside of my side hustle.
Yes.
And how it came about was through my brother. So as the community grew, I started thinking, well, how do I make money off of this? And at that time, my brother was working for a company that deals with men's fragrances and watches. And so he made an introduction for me at the company, and they said, cool, they'll like sponsor an event. It wasn't actually money, like I got product. Like when you just start out and you get product for the first time for like just what feels like doing nothing, it's the most amazing feeling. And then at some point you realize, well, actually product isn't going to like pay the bill. So I need to actually charge money for this. Yes. But it was actually, like, now that you bring it up, it was quite a big moment, that instant when you see that you can make money doing something else. Yeah. And I know in the online world, they always say, just make your first dollar, because the moment you do that, you realize that if I can make $1, I can make 10, I can make 100, I can make 1,000. Yeah. And so it definitely, like, it breaks through a limiting belief that you might have about making money in different kind of ways. There were many interesting moments on this journey. My first one was trying to create a directory site. So do you know Upwork and Fiverr, those kind of sites?
Yes.
They're all marketplaces where you can, like, as a freelancer, sell your skills. So I thought, you know what, South Africa needs one of those. Yeah. I hired some guys in India to develop the site for me. We launched it. I was even like on Tech Central. I felt very much like a tech entrepreneur taking over the world. And then like we registered 5 users and it went nowhere. Then I wanted to create a physio site to do the same thing. Went nowhere.
Yeah.
So I had a long like list of failures leading me to Better Man. You know, the biggest thing is along the way, I learned how to develop a WordPress site. Yeah. I got good at social media. I understood the newsletter game. And it was all those learnings that led me to creating Better Man that was successful pretty quickly and easily. Yeah. So you learn a lot from those failures.
What was the first thing you did with your first paycheck? Do you remember?
I think we just went out to celebrate. My first paycheck would have been from my community service years. So yes. Just coming out of physio. And I found it the other day and I was like, wow, you've come a long way.
Oh, wow. How much was it, if you don't mind me asking?
It was 8,000 Rand.
I mean, that was a lot of money for just coming out of university.
Yeah, no, it was awesome.
And do you remember what you did with it outside of going out? Was there a big purchase that you made in the first few months of being an independent guy?
I don't think so. Like back then, I actually didn't have the hobbies that I have today. Back then, I was just gymming and working and going out.
Yes.
My community service year was an interesting year because it was just kind of like a fun in-between year. Like it was kind of nowhere, you know. You're sitting in this space where, okay, you know, next year, you're still going to be a physio. It's going to be in a different setup. But you're not really forecasting into the future going, oh, I have this big dream. Like you're just kind of like enjoying that year as the sort of space in between.
Yeah.
Kind of a play year. There was no seriousness to life. Not even contemplating it, the reality of adulthood that you would face coming out of that year.
You are listening to More Than Money, a podcast collaboration brought to you by Sasfin Wealth. At Sasfin Wealth, we empower our clients to reach their global investment goals, to retire with dignity, and to leave a lasting legacy. If you would like to have real money conversations, visit sasfin.com/wealth and talk to us. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
What are some of the financial decisions you've made and you went back, you said, Erik, maybe that was not such a fantastic idea?
Sure. How much time do we have on this podcast? Because that's a very long discussion.
Give us your top 3.
Yeah, I've always been pretty bad at putting money away because it kind of has the habit of like money comes in and I just want to do stuff with it. I just want to go and buy new golf clubs and I want to go buy that new watch and I want to go buy my new knife and new camera stuff. So today there are lots of things that I want to spend my money on. I think one of the best decisions I made with my money though was to start offshoring it. Yeah. Fortunately, I have a wife that's in the financial space and she's made me a little bit more mindful of how I spend my money. A little bit, and it's taken a lot of time to do that. But so at least now, you know, the same way how I deal with VAT in my business is that when the money comes in, I always just put away the VAT. It's just part of the routine and the ritual.
Yes.
And so the same thing now for savings these days into offshore. So I've done that. I've done a little bit of Bitcoin and crypto, of course, at some point, which didn't work out all that well, as we all know. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with my spending and trying to think about savings.
For me, it kind of sounds like you are the type of person who want to see the growth of your money really quickly, or otherwise, okay, what else can I do with my money instead of just let it sit in my retirement annuity? What understanding did your wife try to put in you and say, hey, you really should take this thing seriously?
A big focus is taking money offshore. And I guess before, I never really thought about that as an option. So that's definitely one part of it. But then also the second part of it is just, it's so easy to live for right now, for in the moment. But there are always going to be things that happen down the line. And, I speak about anti-fragility often during my talks and stuff. And anti-fragility means that when we look at many systems, those systems are fragile because they have one point of failure. And so if you think about that through the lens of personal finance, if you don't have backups, so like financial savings and then financials into like stock and offshore, then if something happens and you can't make money that month, you are very fragile. You're in a very difficult position.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are anti-fragile, meaning that you have multiple savings and multiple backups, then if something happens, then you're okay. So I think it's brought to life that idea for me a lot more and made me think about how do I become more anti-fragile with my money so that if anything happens, we're good, and also it's not just me anymore. It's our family, That's made it more important for me to look after my money well.
You mentioned that your wife is a bit more prudent, if you can call her that, right? Where did you guys start having a conversation about money?
We actually started talking about money pretty early on. I kind of forced myself because it has been an uncomfortable topic for me, if I'm honest. For example, I remember with my initial accountants, I always felt so guilty for them being able to see what's happening in my business. Like when I just moved into coaching, there's that space between where things are going really well in the physio practice, but then I move into coaching full time and it's not going that well. And I was like, oh, they're looking at my accounts and I'm so embarrassed by the amount of money that's in there, or like, oh, am I going to have enough money to pay SARS this month? And now where I'm at with my accountant, I'm having these awesome open conversations about money. And it doesn't feel like it comes with baggage and shame and guilt. And I think a big part of that is the fact that we were having those conversations pretty early on. And also the fact that I wanted us to be a team.
Yeah.
And to be a team means that we have to be open about every aspect of life, especially the things that might feel uncomfortable. And money, it just seems to be something that we are usually quite uncomfortable speaking about.
With your wife, do you frequently talk about money right now? Do you plan together? Do you budget together? What does your household look like in terms of finances?
We both put money away in our individual capacity. And then we have a shared account as well where we put money away for certain goals that we have.
Yeah.
So if that's a trip overseas or if it's just building emergency funds, those things kind of we do collectively. And then we put away into our separate individual accounts as well. But it's part of the goal setting at the start of the year. So we always do like, what is your word for the year? And that's something I'm quite religious about, is what is going to be the word that will theme the year for you? So we sit down and we do that together. And then I write down the words on our fridge so we can look at it every day. We know what it is. I know that her word for the year is meaningful. Mine for the year is brilliant. And so how do we bring those words into the things that we do? And then on top of that, we'll set financial goals as well and say, well, what are the goals for the end of the year? What do we want it to be? And then a very cool little ritual that we started this year that I'm encouraging more people to get into is we bought a few bottles of champagne at the start of the year. And we wrote down our goals on those bottles of champagne. And so every time you crack a goal, you get to crack a bottle.
Oh, that is brilliant. I love that. In your book, Dangerous, you mentioned success can be a threat. And it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, The Rise of the Batman, where he says, success has defeated you. If you think about all the things that you've achieved so far, and when you look at the amount of money that you've made and kept, would you say it is aligned? Or you find yourself complacent in some areas, especially when it comes to your finances?
This is a conversation I had recently with a friend. And if he had to ask me, do I feel like I'm successful? I'll say yes, because I can appreciate the journey for where I am today.
Yeah.
But I'll also say no, because I feel very, 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 very far away from where I want to be. And so I remember when I wrote that, the idea or the conversation that sparked the book Dangerous was with this CEO that I was coaching at the time that was just wildly successful. Like you couldn't look at this guy and pity him in any way because he had everything. He was CEO, making lots of money, loved by his team, his colleagues, good family life, healthy, also like a handsome guy, he had that silver fox thing going. So there was nothing to pity about him. But when we had this conversation, it was just so clear how complacent he had become. to me, but not to him. And so he was the perfect example of this, that when you become successful, you lean back a bit. And those skills that made you successful in the first place, they become dull and they become blunt.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, you're not as sharp anymore and you kind of lose that killer instinct. I don't feel like I've lost that yet because I don't feel like I've reached the levels that I want to reach yet. But it happens very, very quickly. And usually it happens without us even seeing it or knowing it. It takes someone from the outside to show you what's happened to you.
If someone finds themselves in that type of situation, how do you normally get them to snap out of it?
Well, usually the awareness of it is a good starting place. That once you realize that you are sitting in the bottom of the pit, or once you realize that you've taken your foot off the gas, often that in itself is a big enough wake-up call to say, okay, no, I need to do something. I don't want to be here. The book talks about being dangerous and being harmless. Like dangerous meaning that you're a threat to the threats, that you are that kind of formidable person that shows up and everyone goes like, we have to watch out for them because, you know, they're a mover and a shaker. They're someone who is confident and they're going to overcome any challenge that you put in front of them. And then on the opposite spectrum of that is someone who's harmless, who is the victim, whose way of thinking, feeling, and acting is depressed and is low, and it means like they're not moving forward. And once they see that, they realize they don't want to be it because no one wants to be it. No one wants to be harmless. No one wants to be stuck in survival mode. And so often just that awareness is enough of a catalyst to shoot them out. The other option is that you want to almost paint the picture of what could be.
Yeah.
When I was doing my talks, I remember the very first time I did a talk about being dangerous. I got onto stage. It was at an event for a big insurer. It was really awesome. Like everyone was wearing shirts that said, be dangerous. Like the entire conference was themed around this. Yeah. And I got there and I was like, hell yes. Like, this is really cool. And then got onto stage, delivered my talk, got off stage and thought, oh geez, like you've just become a motivational speaker, like the most like cliche motivational speaker that you could ever look for. Like you've just become that, because I was using all these big words and like, you know, 0 week and hyper this and whatever. And I went on this mission to say, okay, I don't want to be that. I want this to be as practical as possible. And then along the way, I realized actually what I'm doing is I'm losing the essence of this, which is that if I can get you into a conversation, if I can get you to listen to me for a 20-minute talk, and you come out of that talk with the desire to be dangerous, then that's actually the best thing I can do for you, is to awaken that bit of fire in your chest again. Because once you have that, you can start figuring out a lot of the details and a lot of the stuff that needs to happen around it. But that desire, that feeling that, yes, man, like, of course, I don't want to be harmless. I also want to be a bit more dangerous. Once you get that, that's the trigger.
When you started the high performance coaching, we know that entrepreneurship is not the easiest. How did you pull yourself out in moments where you just felt like, goodness, my bills keep on coming and yet my income is not matching their bills?
Growing up, like, we didn't have a lot of money. There was always money. I often listen to entrepreneurs and they're like, we didn't have enough money to even like be in a house, like stepped in a car. Like, you know, you have these like really like hectic sort of war stories that come out of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I always listened to that and I thought, I didn't have that. Life was always just okay. Like, it wasn't driving the fanciest cars, but like there was always food. We lived in a nice house. Like, we never wanted for anything.
Yeah.
And at some point I said to my wife, I wonder if that did me a disservice in some way, that it didn't make me hungry enough for success.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't have those stories of like getting down to my last cent. And of course, what karma did is it said, oh, you want those stories? I'll give you those stories. Coming out of physio, I definitely had those moments where, because remember my physio days, I hadn't yet met my wife, so I definitely wasn't putting money away. And I made the leap. I said, cool, I have about a month or two in terms of runway from a financial point of view, and I'll just make it work.
Yeah.
And it went okay for a while, and then you start realizing, okay, like this flow of clients that you had isn't just a perpetual stream. Like, you need to be doing stuff for it all the time. And so there were definitely months where that stream just went away. But I think I always just had the belief that things will be okay. When I do feel like I'm at my lowest and that business isn't where it's supposed to be, I always just come back to basics. And back to basics for me is that I get my morning routine into a good place. Yeah. Because the only person who's going to do something about this lack of clients is going to be me. And the only way that I'm going to do something about it is if my mind is in a good space. Yeah. And the only way I'm going to get my mind into a good space is to spend 30 minutes or so meditating, thinking about abundance, thinking about what I want my future to look like, living into that, so that the moment I get up from that meditation, that I'm that version of me that I want to be. And when I can do that, I feel like I'm in a space to change what my future looks like. And trust me, there's been many moments where I've had to sit down and meditate very hard to get up and still keep going. But there's no other option really, you have to just keep going.
Has there ever been moments where you felt like you were sort of doing things to look the part or to keep up even with your friends who are seemingly successful?
I guess it's almost bred into the system at this point. A big part of how we build our businesses is through social media. I would never go into social media and say, oh, this has been like a tough month for me from a business point of view, because I don't want my clients to think it's been a tough month for me, because what you put out, I think you get more of, so. And keynote speaking and workshops can often be like that, where you'll have like 2 or 3 months where business just is blasting and then it dips a little bit. And when you listen to keynote speakers, they'll often say, oh, like, I'm wondering, is this my last gig that I'll ever do? Like, will everyone ever book me again? But like, even in those moments, you still have to rely on like what you've done in the past and how busy you were in the past. And the fact that you were on this show or you did publish this book. So those are the things that you keep putting forward. I do find that there's a dissonance between what we put out into the world and the reality that we are living. But I also don't think there's necessarily an other way from a business point of view, because I don't think I want to see businesses showing me that they're struggling online. I don't know. Like, I think it takes away the confidence that we have in that business. So there's a fine line between that authenticity that you bring to the online space versus the projection of confidence versus just kind of the expectation that people have of how we show up in a digital world.
What are some of your fears around money?
The first thing that came to my mind, as you say, that is it running out. I think I've always just had this mindset that things will be okay. And actually what I've realized is that what you put out is perpetuated. And so a realization I had maybe about a year or two ago is that things will be okay means things will be okay. They won't be great. They won't be excellent. They'll be okay, because that's what you're putting out. And so a fear that I think I've developed is that it won't be abundant or more. So maybe those who would sort of go hand in hand, the one would be money going away, and the other would be that money just stays the same. Whereas I know that I want to live at a higher level. I want to get to a higher level. And part of that fear would be not getting there. I think they all kind of play together.
If you did not have the money that you have currently, and if you didn't have any worries at all about money, what would you be doing?
Apart from playing paddle and golf all the time, I think I'd be doing what I'm doing right now. I'm very fortunate that I get to wake up and really enjoy what I do. I love being on this interview with you today. I love writing a leadership manual that Sasfin was also involved in. I love being able to get to sit down with the team and talk about how do they improve their teamwork and performance. We kick off a team building sprint tomorrow. And these are all things that I love, So, and I moved to Cape Town this year. So like now I'm even happier. So I think all in all, to be honest, I think I would be doing exactly what I'm doing right now.
Now, Erik, with all the money lessons that you've learned so far, what do you hope your legacy will be?
So I think the most important thing would be that we shouldn't feel shame and guilt around money. Those are horrible emotions to be feeling around money. It's something that we should be able to openly discuss, to also appreciate, even when you're just starting out and you maybe not making the amount of money that you want to be making, even when you're winning clients, but they're small clients, it pales in comparison to where you want to be, or even maybe what you think your worth is. We should still appreciate those small wins. We should appreciate small bits of money that comes in and not be disrespectful of it, not be resentful of it, not feel any shame or guilt towards it, and really start to think of money as something that brings joy into your life and change that relationship that you have with money. I know that that's definitely been a journey that I've been on, and it's taken time, especially like if you grow up in a household where perhaps you don't speak about money as much. It takes time to rewire and change that relationship. But it's a worthwhile journey and it's a worthwhile effort, because once you get to do that and you see money in a different light, it changes what your bank account looks like. That's what I would want my money legacy to be, for us all to have a different relationship with money.
I think that's such a wonderful legacy that anyone could have. Thank you so much, Erik.
Thank you.
This was a Sasfin Wealth podcast. Visit sasfin.com/wealth for more information.